You're listening to This Motorcycle Life, conversations about why we ride. Episode 37, Eye of the Beholder. I'm Bruce Philp. Thanks for listening. So, are motorcycles beautiful? It's not a trick question. As the covers come off our machines after a long winter, in this hemisphere at least, you'd have to be made of stone to say no. Still, what better way to celebrate the return of sunshine and dry roads than to talk about why our machines make our hearts go pitter-patter the way they do? And you're about to meet someone with the perfect credentials to have that conversation. Spoiler alert, she thinks what makes our motorcycles beautiful might just be us. We'll get to that in a moment, but first let's start with a few quick pieces of housekeeping. Thanks as always for your emails and for a few fresh reviews on Apple Podcasts, which help people find this show. I especially appreciated the feedback on my conversation with Eric Buell. That one made me a little nervous, if I'm honest, because he's Eric Buell, and because I wasn't really sure what people would be expecting. That was silly, as it turns out. It seems like you can't go wrong talking about motorcycles, even if it's with a legend. Thanks to everybody who took the time to write and say so. And, of course, you don't get to hear this conversation without first hearing my pitch to show your appreciation by giving to Movember in the name of this podcast. This is a big season for Movember, with Testicular Cancer Awareness Month in April and the Distinguished Gentleman's Ride now coming up in May. I also recently sat in on a panel discussion for fundraisers which focused on what Movember's doing to support mental health right now, a need that has maybe never been greater. Well, if you needed one more little nudge to click on the mustache in my show notes, well, maybe now's the time. And one final item, I was thrilled to be asked to be a judge for the Santa Cruz Motorcycle Film Festival, which is happening online from May 14th to May 30th, and I am blown away by the quality of the entries. Well, this community is getting better and better at telling its stories, and it's been a total pleasure to watch these films. If you want to see for yourself, go to revsisters.com to find out more. Well, you can do that wherever in the world you are, and you really should. You'll find a link in my show notes. And with that, why don't we get started? Well, pretty much my only social media indulgence is Instagram, and I've curated my feed, as they say, so that it's almost nothing but motorcycles. No politics, no food, no cats, just bikes. Builders' bikes, manufacturers' bikes, influencers' bikes, the bikes of guests and listeners of this podcast, and the bikes of randoms like me. When things were more normal, I tried to make a contribution by posting shots of motorcycles I came across on the street, but that's been tough to pull off this year as we've stayed closer to home. And yet, still, my Instagram family has remained great company over the course of a winter that seemed to last forever. So this episode is a tribute to them. Of course, the photos we share online are all over the map, creatively speaking. Extraordinary pictures of ordinary bikes, ordinary pictures of extraordinary bikes, and every other combination of those things. But the one thing they all have in common, the one thing we all have in common when the sight of our motorcycles has us reaching for a camera, is that we really believe in that moment that our motorcycles are beautiful. The fact of all those pictures proves it, even if the pictures themselves, in my case, don't always deliver. And the endless appetite for them proves that as much as any rider wants to capture how they're feeling in those moments, so do the rest of us want to share them. And with spring here and all our freshly polished machines joyfully hitting the road again, I thought that might make a suitably cheerful topic of conversation. All I needed was an expert. And that wish was granted thanks to an introduction by a past guest, Episode 6's Hugh Francis Anderson, who has become a great friend of the show. Amy Shore is a professional photographer based in the UK. And though lots of her work is commercial, she is, to my eye, a photojournalist at heart, with a special gift for photographing cars and motorcycles and the people who love them. And that just might be because she's one of us, and her affection for motorcycle culture shines through in her coverage of events like the Great Mallee Rally, the Goodwood Revival, and the Distinguished Gentleman's Ride. This affectionate eye would earn her the recognition of being Nikon's youngest ever UK ambassador, among other honors. She's also a co-host of the Driven Chat podcast, which I have to say is doing embarrassingly well in its rookie year. I caught up with Amy Shore at her home in Oxford, England. Hey, Amy, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Bruce. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. All things considered, and thanks for joining me today. To me, you're a bit of a celebrity. I'm a big fan of your work, which we'll talk about a little bit in a minute. But the main thing that I hope we're going to talk about is whether motorcycles and how motorcycles are beautiful things. And I hope that's not a dumb idea. Is that a dumb idea for a podcast?
No, that's a wonderful idea, because I think so many people look at motorcycles in a completely different way to each other. And, for me in the car world as well, it's the same with cars. So, no, I think it's a great podcast idea because, it's the idea of what do motorcycles and their beauty mean to you. And I think that's such a brilliant podcast. So, yeah, no, thank you so much for having me on. And I mean, yeah, I definitely do not feel any form of celebrity, but it's quite funny. Sometimes I've been spotted out in the wild sometimes, and I've been like, I was spotted. Like one time I was with my mom and I'd taken her away for out for lunch in London, and we were walking up the steps of St. Paul's Cathedral. And I was like, this is lovely. And then some random dude walks up to me and he's like, hey, are you Amy Shore? In front of my mom. And my mom's like, yes, she is. And I'm like, shh, mom. I mean, it's something that doesn't happen very often, but when it does, I'm like, I definitely am like, yes, this is something I never thought would happen in my life.
Well, congratulations. I personally am more comfortable in my ignominious, kind of obscurity, but different strokes and all that. I'm glad. So I'm glad you think this is a good idea, because it was a bit of an experiment. I guess that experiment remains ahead of us. So why don't we start off the way these things inevitably do by introducing you a bit. Now, as a photographer, I have the sense that your car work is maybe more widely known. That might not be accurate, but I have it on authority that you're an avid motorcyclist, and in fact have documented a lot of motorcycle culture in your work. So I'm curious to know, how did motorcycles come into your life, and where do they fit these days? I think on Instagram the other day I saw one in your living room, so that seems to beg an explanation.
Yeah, well, you know what? It's funny. I do photograph quite a lot of motorcycle things, and not quite as much as the car things, but I don't post about them as much, and I don't really know why. I think probably because it's such a passion of mine that I end up kind of forgetting, because I'm usually on a trip or on a road trip or something, and I know the cars in my head are work, and the motorcycles are also work, but they're more fun, and I just kind of forget to promote that side of my life, which is funny. So yeah, I mean, I've only been riding for what would have been 4 or 5 years, something like that. I passed my test in October 2016, so we're coming to 4.5 years, and it's funny really. I only got into riding motorcycles because I thought, when I became a car photographer, that the car world and the bike world talked to each other, and they were all like one big world. And then I got into there, and I thought, oh no, these people don't talk at all. They do not overlap very much at all. And so I managed to get a little bit of an overlap, and I got asked to go and photograph this event called the Distinguished Gentleman's Ride in 2014. And I knew nothing about it at the time, so I was like, yeah, sure thing, I'll go and shoot this event. And it was funny being there. I just thought, all these people are so much cooler than me. Man, I could never be this cool. Maybe I should start riding motorcycles. I realized as well that being able to ride motorcycles gave me something to talk about with people who didn't know how to talk to me. So if I was a 25-year-old girl walking into a workshop of blokes, for example, and they're all mechanics and, mechanic-y, And then some of the older guys, especially, I just didn't know, like, if I was trying to photograph them, it was quite difficult to keep up a conversation. And so the minute I started riding motorcycles and learning even, you'd see their calendars above their toolboxes, which was either naked women or motorcycles. And so with the motorcycles, I could say, oh, hey, I'm learning to ride a bike, or I do ride, or I've got these bikes. And suddenly that conversation just opened up between us, and I could just talk about that, what's photographing them, and it made my job a lot easier. And so, I got into bikes really because of this event called the Distinguished Gentleman's Ride. And I'm sure you know all about it, and hopefully you're going to be on this year's ride in your local town or city.
I may be the only one, but
that's
yes.
all that matters. You don't need any more than you. I think so far, a lot of us are currently going to be the only ones. So it basically started off with that. And I thought to myself, you know what? I would love to ride motorcycles. My brother started riding bikes, and my mom was like, I don't want you riding motorcycles, but he's younger than me, so he could totally get away with it. And he was like, I'm going to do it anyway. And so then he got into riding bikes. I said to my mom, I was like, well, if he's allowed to ride bikes, then I'm allowed to ride bikes. And so then I learned how to ride. And then my dad was like, well, I used to ride bikes, and it's a massive passion of mine. And your mum's maybe stopped riding bikes when we had you kids. So I'm going to learn. I'm going to get back into riding myself. So now all of us ride bikes, and my mum has no control over any of it. She just has to come along in the back with my dad to join in. I think that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. What are you riding these days?
So I've got my daily, I call it my daily, I've not been on it since, October last year, is my 1972 Honda 354, which I love. It was my first big bike as such when I passed my test. And there's not many 350s over here in the UK. They never got made over here. So it's an American import. And I just love it. So I've had it for the same time I've been riding, 5 years. And in my lounge, I do have my 1966 BSA Bantam, which is an old post office bike, and I love it. I ended up buying that bike in an antique shop. It hadn't run for about 10 years. Oh, wow. It was living in a museum. And basically, I've always said that I wanted a lounge bike. At some point in my life, I'd like a lounge that could have a motorcycle in it. Didn't really think any more of it than that. And then I walked into this shop and I just saw this motorcycle, and I was like, that is my lounge bike. It's beautiful. It's little, it's cute. And so I had a house that just couldn't fit a motorcycle in it, but I bought it anyway. And then I moved to a house that definitely could fit a motorcycle in it, and it looked great. And now I've moved into a house that really, really, really shouldn't have a motorcycle in it, because it's like 2 tiny rooms downstairs and like 1.5 tiny rooms upstairs, and that's it. And half of the whole like window area of my lounge is now the motorcycle. So it's fine. I now know that you can have a motorcycle in any property. So anyone that says, oh, we can't have the bike in the house because it's not big enough, I bet you my house is smaller than your house. So, unless you live on a boat or something. And even then, I reckon you could probably still get a bike in there. So then I actually also am about to take delivery of Royal Enfield. I think they're lending me an Interceptor, so I'm going to get that next week, which I'm really looking forward to. And then I'm going to do the this year's Distinguished Gentleman's Ride and Triumph are going to lend me a bobber, which I've never ridden either. So all of the bikes, and I love everything to do with them. From somebody that didn't really understand anything to do with cars and motorcycles 10 years ago to now being the person that I am. I honestly, learning to ride a motorcycle, I would say, is the best thing I've learned to do as a grown-up. And I would tell anybody that doesn't ride or is thinking about it and is not sure, go and do it, because it's just amazing. Mm-hmm. That's people who are like, oh, I'd never be able to do it. I'm like, yes, you would, and you could, and do.
Well, honestly, in the UK, they make you work for it, from what I understand. So if you've got this kind of enthusiasm, for the sport where you've learned to do it, then I'm sure there's no one else in the world that's got an excuse.
Well, what's it like? What do you have to do in the States to have to pass your test? Is there like a theory? How difficult is it, or does it depend on the state that you're in?
Yeah, so I think it does. So I'm in Canada, but I think it does vary a little bit by state. there are places where you can get a motorcycle license by writing like doing a written test. And then I think similar to here, there are also places where you can be trained and tested, kind of on a weekend. But there isn't the graduated licensing that you have there. Canada has a version of it, but it isn't as difficult, and it doesn't have the horsepower restrictions that you do.
Yeah, no, we have some weird restrictions, which luckily I learnt later, so I didn't have to go through them. But I know my brother did, and I think he was a bit naughty. I think he had it look like it was restricted, and it wasn't really. So, I think he rode around for about a year with it technically being restricted, but not. And I was like, bro, if you get pulled over by the police, he's like, I'll blag my way out of it. And so, but anyway.
Throw the mechanic under the bus. So I'm curious to know what drew you to photographing machines. As a photographer's career, I can't imagine it was the easiest choice. It strikes me there might have been easier ways to make a living, or perhaps not. But I wonder what pulled you to that specialty.
So it's funny actually. It was that thought process of basically how can anybody ever make a living being a photographer that brought me to where I am now. So whilst I was, so like as a teenager, I liked photography. I got my first DSLR when I was 16 on my 16th birthday. And it was always something I was just into. But then I think I met one professional photographer before I got to university. And that photographer photographed like, I think cat food products or something really boring. And I was like, wow, that sounds dull. And then he was like, yeah, it's really hard to get work. And I sometimes do a second job or weddings at the weekend. And I was like, I love photography. And my dream job would be to travel the world and take pictures. And I don't think that's a realistic job. So I just didn't bother trying to do it. So I ended up, I just carried on photographing weddings as more of a hobby than anything, and just kind of like a bit of weekend pocket money. And then, I went to university, and then I thought to myself, do I go and do a photography degree at university? And I was like, nah, it'll be a waste of money. I won't get a job in it, so I won't bother. And then, so I went to university and studied something completely different, which was silversmithing or metal smithing. So I learned things like a lot of jewelry design, but then I also did things like welding and brazing and got a lot of soldering of small things and getting frustrated. And then graduated university and basically I bought myself quite a nice camera. So with the remainder of my student loan, because I managed because I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to move away from home because I thought there's no point spending loads of money moving away from home and spending just time. I don't really know. I just didn't see the point of spending that much money living somewhere doing a degree in something I didn't know if I wanted to do forever. So I stayed living at home with my parents. So that meant that the student loan that I got, I could spend on other things. So for the 3 years, the first year I bought my classic Mini, so I suppose that's where it started. My dad has always been a classic car guy and a motorcycle guy. But because of my younger brother, it was always like they would go and do the boy car bike thing, which was fine. As a teenage girl, I didn't really care about that at the time. I've not been a petrol head for the entirety of my life.
Okay.
So they would go and do that. And then it wasn't until a friend of mine who was the daughter of a friend of my dad's, actually, because they were all car people. She started driving around school with this beautiful cream Austin. I don't even know what it is. And I was like, man, she's so cool. And so I said to my dad, I was like, Dad, I want to get a classic car. And he was like, well, get a Mini because that's the only thing I know how to fix. And I was like, all right then. So I got a classic Mini. For my first year. Second year of uni, I bought my camera. Third year of uni, I bought my first computer. So basically, my student loan set me up for the beginning of my automotive car photography business.
Right.
And so I graduated, and then friends of my dad had built this replica Ferrari P4 car, and it's a beautiful machine. And I suppose at the time I just didn't understand how special that machine was. And they just said, could you take your lovely new shiny camera and photograph bits of it for us, just like, side, front three quarters, and then things like, just the bits of engines and brakes and all the things that we've done, because we've built this car from scratch, and we're so proud of it. I was like, yeah, sure thing. Don't really know what I'm doing, but I'll do it anyway. And these photographs ended up going viral online, and it was that was quite insane, actually. Somebody shared the album that I put on my website about 3 months later, who he basically ended up, the earliest I can trace it back is a car photographer called Easton Chang ended up posting to his Facebook followers. And at the time, you think he had 500,000 Facebook followers. And that's where it kind of went boom.
Wow.
So, but in the same month that happened, I went and photographed the Goodwood Revival. Mm-hmm. And I love that event. Again, it's something because my dad was like, I know you're not that into cars, but it's so atmospheric. I think you'll really love it. So we'd been a couple of times in previous years, and I thought, yeah, I really do like it. You know what? Cars can actually be all right. I quite like classic cars. And so I wasn't bothered about any of the modern stuff. So that's basically it. So when I photographed the revival, I sent those with my new camera. I sent those photographs to Goodwood over a Facebook message. And I was like, hey, I just took some pictures of your event. Hey, you might like them. And then 5 months later, they got back to me being like, hey, we do like those photos. Would you like to photograph our next event? So I've always said that those two individual points kind of kick-started my car photography career. And then it was from that about a year and a half later, it was the first motorbike event that I photographed. So, the Gentleman's Ride. So it all kind of happened very, very quickly and snowballed very quickly. And the more I photographed motorcycle things, the more I just kind of thought, oh, you know what? I felt left out. I think it was more of an emotional side of things. I thought, oh, I don't like feeling left out of all this. And then my brother ended up, when he passed his motorcycle test, he took me out for a few rides on the back of his bike. And I was like, this is quite good fun, actually, isn't it? And then it all kind of stemmed from there. So I've gone off on a very long story about how I got here. I hope I'm not bored any of your listeners.
No, I'm quite sure the opposite. But you actually answered my next question, which was going to be about, tell me how the classic vehicles thing kind of happened, because it seems to be something you've got some affection for. But it feels like sort of the hand of destiny, because you kind of backed into the classic vehicles thing, and yet at the same time you already had what I would consider a classic car, and would go on to, I think you drive a Defender as well, which is of indeterminate age, so it may as well be classic. So the impression given is that you like old things. Is that true, or was that an accident too?
Absolutely. So this is the great thing about your podcast as well, is that, you're talking about the love of motorcycle, especially motorcycle design. And that, to me, with motorcycles especially, it probably more so than cars, it was all about the visuals of them. Even now, I consider myself a petrol head, but even now, if somebody is like, hey, do you want me to show you the engine of my Porsche? I'm like, yeah, no, thanks. Which I feel a bit bad about. But I'm not that interested. I love the way that cars sound. I love driving them. So with motorcycles, but when it comes down to the nitty gritty things, I am not a rivet counter, and it's just not my interest. So it is all about the design. Being a photographer, all I and other photographers are looking for is how light falls. And the minute that you look at, the way that light falls on a rear arch of for example, a Ferrari P4, or the way that it catches the edge of the seat of a motorcycle, or you get the headlight lights of a bike just in twilight. It's just all of those beautiful things that really attracted me to the automotive world. And the people behind both sides, cars, classic cars and motorcycles, because, both things, classic cars and motorcycles, people are into because they enjoy it and it's fun, and they have a thrill from those things. Everybody's got everyone normal has got a modern car, or when it comes to supercars or racing, it's all to do with money and business, and we're doing this because this is our job. I mean, classic side of jobs as well, but a lot of the time, it doesn't make sense for me to only own a Defender and a Classic Mini and a motorcycle. All of them, 2003 is my Defender. So as you said, it's near enough classic itself. But it's there because I absolutely love it. And motorcycling, you do meet people that ride every day, but less so in the UK. I think it's always I do it because I love it. It's not particularly practical. But but you just absolutely love everything that the machines can give to your life. And yeah, it's all about the passion and the desire and the love for adventure and travel and stories and just all of that. Like I remember this is going off on a tangent now, like lying in bed, like my dad would come and read me bedtime stories. And often instead of having him read me like a book, I would say, like as a 6-year-old, like, tell me a time when you were on an adventure or you were really scared or something like that. And most of the time he was like, well, I was on this road trip and something would have happened on this road trip. And these road trips would vary from motorcycle like adventures through mountains where one of them got a flat tire and there's no mobile phones, or traveling through Germany with German friends and then the headlights just go out on their car, and all these different things. And I just think, you know what, this is fun, this is adventurous. And it's just maybe it's something from that point that always kind of sparked something in me about a love of travel. A love of travel, I think, is more than anything. And just cars and motorcycles are the way I can do that. Mm-hmm. And I'm too lazy to get on a bicycle, so maybe that's it.
Well, it's funny. You said a minute ago that you were going off on a tangent, but in fact, I felt like maybe you read my notes because. So I've just got kind of like one more line of inquiry, and then we can get into motorcycles proper. But okay. In fact, you touched right on it. I wonder, have you ever heard of something called the significant objects experiment?
No. Tell me more.
It's so cool. So essentially, it was kind of an anthropological stunt that a couple of journalists pulled a few years ago, in which they bought a bunch of kind of thrift store trinkets, just junk. And then they hired professional authors, people of the stature of like Colson Whitehead, to write stories about those objects. And they were not lies. They were not fake stories. They were just stories about the objects. And then they turned around and sold the objects on eBay at a considerable profit over what it had cost them to buy them. And so the moral of the story is that value is somehow enhanced by story, even if that story isn't necessarily intrinsic to the object itself. The object can transport you if it has the help of some kind of narrative. So. Super geeky, typical me. But I suppose if value is enhanced by story, then maybe beauty is too. And I was going to ask you what you thought about that. And the reason I was going to ask you is that your work makes me think of it. So when I look at your photographs, there's a kind of, they're very atmospheric, to use a word you used a little earlier. There's a sort of nostalgic romance about it that implies a story, even if I don't know what it is. They're like memories. And I guess I wonder, is that conscious, or is it just a function of the age of the machines? And if it's conscious, how are you making those choices? How are you using context to make us feel like we're looking at someone's memory?
Wow, that's a really good question. I've kind of been asked questions similar to that in the past, but never in that way. And I suppose you're completely right. I do try to create something, especially when it's an event or something, that just kind of holds on to that moment, which sounds really cheesy and cliche, and I'm sorry about that, but it's just something I think to myself, okay, for example, the Goodwood revival, where we photograph these classic cars. The cars have been photographed 1,000 times. The event has been going for years and years and years. So how are my photographs going to be any different to those hundreds of thousands of shots of this event that have been taken in the past? And I suppose the only way I can make it different is the fact that it's me standing there and watching these people that are here at this very moment and haven't been in this moment right now ever before, and they won't ever again. So I just try to really throw myself into whatever is happening at that moment to try and capture it's just something completely honest. So when it comes to shoots where I'm maybe setting something up, so say someone's like, okay, I want you to photograph my cars for me or my motorcycles, whatever. That's almost slightly different because you're trying to create the story rather than capture the story. And that's something I struggle with. So my favorite thing to do is just to document whatever's going on. I like to try and photograph that and document that. So to have to kind of make something up, I find much more difficult. I don't really know why. Some people love it, especially, a lot of car photographers who do more commercial side of things. that's their skill. They're fantastic at knowing where they want to put lights and where they want to have the car angled and what background and how people are going to be walking or interacting with the car. And I just think to myself, that's way too many decisions. And the idea of trying to create that, I just find not particularly enjoyable. And to have something instead where you have no control over it whatsoever, and you just got to see what happens and how you're going to get the best out of that, and to create those moments or that story, I find far more rewarding, and I think reflects in my work. Oh, I hope it reflects in my work. I try to make it. And so it's more out of trying to capture the honest story that's there, or there's what's that there's the song about sunscreen. Everybody should wear sunscreen or something. And there's a line in it which is like, giving advice is a form of nostalgia, and the way that you pick up the advice, you rub it down, paint it new, and recycle it for more than it's worth. And I guess that is what I try to do with my pictures. So of course everything isn't in real life as airy-fairy or as lovely as it was at the moment I was taking that picture. But I do try to still capture that moment and give this essence of romance. And I don't know if it's because I used to shoot weddings, or if it's the way I see the world, or I'm just because I am a bit of a romantic at heart. But yeah, I try my hardest just to, I suppose, take the image of what I truly hope to be feeling or at the time. So I know that the shoots that I'm most stressed out, I produce not my worst work, because it's still, I still usually have to try and make sure it's decent because my client won't pay me. So, but it is the shoots where I know that I'm happy with the shots, and I really felt those moments. Again, it sounds really cheesy and romantic, but it's the shoots where I'm on road trips and I'm loving it and I'm just watching everything that's going on. They are the shoots that I definitely feel are my strongest work, and the images that end up doing very well. And often, if it's with a classic car, it definitely helps. So, yeah. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. It actually makes me think a bit about the series that you did on the Great Malay Rally, which I'll come back to in a bit. But I definitely see what you're saying in those photographs. And I'm also gonna so this is a clever trap on my part. We're gonna come back to your answer a little bit later on when we are faced with the challenge of an ugly motorcycle. But we'll get to that presently. So let's talk about motorcycles. And I want to start off by asking you to react to a quote.
Okay.
A couple of times over the years in this podcast, I can't believe it's been years, there's a show called The Art of the Motorcycle, which was an exhibit at the Guggenheim in 1998, and that has come up in conversation. And it's not entirely surprising, because it's probably the closest to mainstream cultural legitimacy motorcycles have ever become, or maybe I'm just that pretentious, but it does come up, and people who went, it's a point of pride. So it was kind of important at the time. And remember, that time is 1998. So in the introduction to the exhibit's program, I think it's still on the website, it begins with this sentence. It says, "Perhaps more than any other single object of industrial design, the motorcycle can be considered a metaphor for the 20th century." So there's the quote. Now, that probably sounded different in 1998, but I wonder, as someone whose career is very much of this century, what do you think about that?
Give me the quote one more time. Let me think about it.
Sure. Perhaps more than any other, I know, too much of a rambling preamble. Perhaps more than any other single object of industrial design, the motorcycle can be considered a metaphor for the 20th century.
Yes. It's, I still think that continues for this century. And if anything more so, it's just I think the idea of simplistic forward motion, and it's sometimes the world doesn't seem simplistic. And to be honest, with the change from going from combustion engines to electric engines, from cars and motorcycles, I think it's going to that definitely the quote still holds true even in this century. And I think I hope that it continues to hold true, because imagine a world without motorcycles. If people decided that actually traveling is just going to be in our little pods and we're just going to go from A to B because that's what we're going to do. And this is one thing I worry about this century in comparison to the last, the idea of travel. Is it going to just simply get, as it gets easier with either electric things or autonomous things, are we still going to have a lust for adventure? And if so, how are we going to get around doing that? Because that's something that classic cars do for me is there's always that, and motorcycles, there's always that element of fear slightly, or, just what's going to happen. Things could go wrong. Whereas the easier it gets, the less of that adventure you start to feel. And I think I worry that in generations to come, that'll be lost. But at the same time, I say this, I hope that we end up just going to adventure further afield, like space or something. But you can't go to space on a motorcycle. So in terms of the future of motorcycles, maybe it'll be something more along the lines of Tron. I don't know. But sorry, again, I've gone off on a tangent, completely away from your quote.
No, actually, I thought it was a great answer. And it's a theme that comes up again and again. And if it's reassuring to you at all, I should tell you that my last guest, Eric Buell, said that he intends to put a motorcycle on Mars. So we may not be as earthbound as we fear here. I wonder if you think motorcycles belonged in the Guggenheim. Do you think they can be art?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. I don't think anybody could say that they're not art. Can you imagine a motorcycle that's not a piece of art? Is there one, would you say?
No.
I mean, actually, there's a couple of models I probably would think, why would you do that? How is that on the road? But thankfully, very few. It's funny, like a motorcycle, I think, is more of probably the most artistic form of transport over anything else. Maybe that's a bold statement, but it's something about the idea of one human and one machine. And the idea of having pillions and stuff later, I don't think would have been there from this. I don't know my early motorcycles, but I can't imagine they had the ability to take pillions straight from the get-go. I'm not sure. Do you know?
It's tragically, I do know. And so I'm happy to report that the very first movie in which a motorcycle appears starred Charlie Chaplin, and he used it to get the girl. So it seems like the idea of having a passenger, however unwilling,
was always there.
It was always there.
Okay, well, all right. That part of my maybe argument is failed then. But the idea of a motorcycle, you often think, or you often is, a human and a motorcycle. It's the man and the machine, or the woman and the machine. And I think cars and boats and planes and trains, they often had at least another person, and the point of design, I think, can end up getting lost into something much more functional rather than design. I think aerodynamics in cars in the past, I think, were far more interesting than they are now in terms of design. Maybe that's just actually personal preference. I might be being a bit harsh on modern cars there. But when it comes to motorcycles, I just think that so much more weight is based on the design rather than its function necessarily. The more functional a motorcycle is, the less pretty I think it becomes. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's just me, but that's kind of what I've gathered. Like one of the prettiest bikes I ever owned was a 1930 BSA B17. I'm going to say B17. I don't even know if that's a bike. It was a beautiful thing, like a fishtail exhaust. And I would look at that bike and think, that is such a pretty bike, for just beautiful, just to look at. And I was quite sad to have to let it go. And I don't think I've ever thought that about any modern car. Mm-hmm. Or definitely still some modern bikes, but not to the extent. So I just think as time goes on, I worry that maybe in 50 years' time, 100 years' time, people will look back at motorcycles that are designed today and think, you know what, that is the epitome of beauty. And stuff that's older than that, they may think that's just, they were figuring it out. Because I don't particularly find certain Edwardian cars attractive, for example, but 60s and 70s stuff I think is gorgeous. So I don't know. What about you? Do you think that the older bikes went to are to an extent prettier? Do you think design of motorcycles now is still gorgeous? What's some of your favorite modern motorcycle design?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one of the things that I thought was interesting about the Guggenheim story was that there were a lot of elites who thought that the show was vulgar and populist, and the museum had no business putting it on. And I can't comment on that, but there was an element of defiance in having done it at all, and I think to me that's what makes bikes interesting, is that they are defiant. You talked about modern cars, and I think the issue with cars is that the wind wants everything to look the same, and so if aerodynamics are of primary importance, then by definition, between that and the misuse of focus groups, cars are going to start to resemble each other, whereas motorcycles remain, steadfastly impractical and silly and rely on obscure physics to work and aerodynamics, apart from a very few kind of Valentino Rossi types, really don't matter all that much to us. So they're exempt somehow from that practical stuff. And to me, the older bikes are more beautiful, but it has something to do. There's some contamination of nostalgia in that. And I'll give you an example. So this is kind of by way of wondering if there's more involved here than just aesthetics. So I'll give you a personal example. By far, on the street and in social media, the bike that I have that gets the strongest emotional response is the one that seems to me the least sculptural, if that makes sense.
Okay.
It's a Triumph. And so, when you look at it practically, you say, well, so there's the engine and there's the wheels and there's something to put gas in and there's something to sit on. And it almost seems like the less hard a designer tries, the more engaging the motorcycle ends up being. And, in my own small way, whenever I post a picture of the Triumph on Instagram, it kind of breaks the internet. Everybody just loves it. And it's, it isn't special. They made lots. And so I wonder what you think of that idea, that the less hard a designer tries, the more honest. Well, I guess I'm biasing the answer here, but the more engaging a motorcycle ends up being. What do you think there is to that?
I think you're right, because so when I take photographs, people say to me, how can I learn how to take photographs? Can you teach me? And absolutely, you can learn. You can learn what a good photograph is, and what a good design of a motorcycle is, for example. But I think at the end, it's down to what you feel is good. So sometimes when I take a photograph, like I'll just move just half a foot one way, and I think, yes, that feels better. Things just line up better, and I prefer this the way it is. And I don't really think about that. The more I think about it, the more I'll screw up that shot. And so I don't know if it's the same with motorcycle design, whereas the minute you just think to yourself, okay, what feels right in terms of design, rather than thinking what is going to sell the best, what will people like, what do people want, more basically down to what feels good as a design of a machine with two wheels, a seat, an engine, and somewhere to fill up your petrol. And so I do think you're right. The minute we stop trying to think about what everybody else may like in our motorcycle that we're designing, I think the better the outcome, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and that particular bike is still the one that I'm most likely to look back on as I walk away, even 7 years later. And and I sort of think so. I'm going to completely reveal my geekdom here, but I kind of think part of the answer has to do with the physicality of them. So, especially a traditional motorcycle has a kind of anatomy to it, right? They have a posture, and you can see muscles and sinew and veins and a heart and all that stuff. I'm sure this sounds completely crazy, but to me, a classically styled motorcycle has that kind of anatomical quality. And the particular bike I'm talking about, I did some suspension work on it a few years ago, and with the result that the bike is a little bit more tail up than the designers intended it to be, and it just looks naughty. It looks like it's ready to have fun somehow. And so he said, digging the hole ever deeper, it ends up feeling to me like taking pictures of motorcycles, or indeed appreciating them, is a bit more like portraiture than it is like product photography. Can you rescue me from this?
No, I do completely understand where you're coming from with that, because especially I think it's the same with cars as well. There is a sense of portraiture about these machines more than any other product on Earth. I think even airplanes and boats. There's something about cars and motorcycles which have got a personality to them, like no other inanimate object. Would they be inanimate because they do move on their own? Anyway, I think also the fact that you need, every time you ride a motorcycle, when you see a motorcycle in movement, there is somebody, a human on that. It is an extension of a human when it's on the road. When you're in a car or something, or in any other form of transportation, that human is lost. So by having a human on a motorcycle as well, I think brings this element of it being almost as I said, an extension of yourself. And I think from a photography point of view and from a personality point of view, yes, I completely agree with you that it does end up becoming more like a portrait shoot, whether there's somebody on it or not.
Yeah, the parallel to horses, it becomes unavoidable at a certain point. In this conversation, I think, because as you say, you can see the rider and the object is in fact not inanimate. So I buy that, and I appreciate you legitimizing my meandering and strange question. So by contrast, I think in our email correspondence, I mentioned that I have another bike, which I think is kind of hideous, and but which over time I've actually kind of come to love. I see it differently than I did when I bought it. I think I said to you that it was a bit like developing a crush on a bank teller.
I was just about to say, is this your bank teller bike?
It is, yeah. So what, speaking as a photographer, what do you think is happening there? Did it just take time for me to see this, or did I change my lens somehow, or did experience transubstantiate it into the object somehow? Why is this machine that is as identical as it could be to the state it was in when I bought it now make me feel different?
Because you've had emotions attached to it, I think. The way that you've experienced bits of life and rides with it, suddenly you end up becoming so much more attached to these things, regardless of how beautiful you think they are. I think you can have something absolutely stunning, but if you keep having bad experiences with them, or no experiences with them, then that beauty will end up fading very quickly. So what's an example? Okay, the house that I've just moved out of, I had quite a lot of bad experiences in that house. It's a beautiful house, but I think I liked it less than when I moved in. So I was quite glad to see the back of it.
Oh dear.
But when it comes to something like a motorcycle, where it becomes, you end up creating these memories and these stories, and this, I don't know, it does become this part of you, and you're like, oh yeah, I did this trip with so-and-so on that bike, and you just end up appreciating it for exactly what it is and what joy it brings to you. So for example, like when my Mini goes wonderfully, and it's I've done so many road trips with it, and I don't know if I'd be able to let it go now because of that reason. But if it breaks down on me, I think it's I don't think the worst of it, but it does frustrate me a little bit. So it's, I think whatever it's, you know what, I've just thought of another analogy, but it might be a bit mean. I suppose, for example, babies. Some babies are pretty babies, some babies are not pretty babies, but you will love that baby regardless because it's your baby.
Yes.
So, I think, as time goes on, that baby becomes a child and whatever, and you have stories, and it's actually pretty cool. So it's the same with, you can tell I'm not a mother, right? Mm-hmm. It's the same with motorcycles, I think. If sometimes when a car has just landed in my lap because of a brand that I'm working with, sometimes I've not particularly liked the car. So, for example, a brand new Mini Countryman was one of the cars that I kind of was asked if I could drive around for a couple of months. And I was like, having a classic Mini, I thought, the Countryman is like the opposite of what a Mini should be. I don't really want it, but I can't say no. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll drive around for a bit. Anyway, by the time I gave it back, I loved that thing. And just for the joy of the drive that it gave me. And then, I started to be a lot more sympathizing to its features, thinking, you know what, it has got bits of elements of the classic Mini. And, I like this on it, and I like the wheels, and I like that. And it ended up becoming something that, I also thought, you know what, I could talk about this car, and I could have one of these happily. And I think, the same with motorcycles, especially if it's your first bike, you will love that thing. I imagine. I hope.
Yeah.
And regardless of how, you might have been able to build it, or the first bike you build. If you imagine building a bike from bits of bikes that you found here, there, and everywhere. It may not be a pretty bike, but you built that, and that is a journey that you have done together, and that is why you end up loving that motorcycle.
So I guess the bias we bring to looking at anything, but certainly a motorcycle, is a big determinant in whether it's beautiful or not. That seems blindingly obvious, but I think that's what you're saying.
Yes, yeah, which is, as you said, very obvious. But I think there's no other. I don't know if there's any other way you can fall in love with something that you do not find so, especially when it comes down to a motorcycle, so lovely. Like, you wouldn't buy an ugly bike and then never ride it and therefore never fall in love with it. Like, I don't really know what the point would be. Just in case you had a need to go out on a motorcycle and jump over a fence in some Great Escape or something.
Right.
But I think that that the love for bikes must come from your daily, or your adventures that come with it. Yeah.
You touched on this a little bit earlier, but I'd love to hear you talk a bit more about it. I have the impression when I look at your motorcycle photography that you really don't want to separate motorcycles from their people when you're shooting them. And I don't know if that's a fair assessment, and you can correct me if it's not. But if it is, I wonder why that is. I think when you take a series of photographs of an E-Type Jaguar, that, all due respect to your earlier response, that feels like sculpture to me. That thing is inherently art. But when you take pictures of motorcycles, their people are not far away. Is that true? And why is that?
I suppose when I shoot a bike that hasn't got somebody on it, I do think it's a lovely piece, as you said, piece of art, but I don't feel like it's alive. Like, if I photograph a car, one of my things I like to do is I nearly always like to have the headlights on, not in every shot, but or just by having a little bit of life come out of it. I just think, that just lights the image. That brings that vehicle a light in its eyes, literally. And so by having somebody on the motorcycle brings life to that bike for me. And without somebody, I suppose I sometimes just think it's a little bit, I don't know, just I can't envision myself riding that bike without somebody on it in a photograph. And it just, again, it is a beautiful piece of art, but the thing that really inspires me and gets me excited is the idea of adventure and that movement. So I do think bikes are ever so pretty on their own, but the sense of emotion that I want to kind of give to whoever sees the photographs is one of adventure. And I'd love to ride bikes. I'd love to be able to go out and do that. And especially if it's something that people haven't really thought about doing before, like myself, I've not been into bikes the entirety of my life. So I didn't fall in love with the motorcycle first and then the adventure. I fell in love with the adventure and then was like, yes, the motorcycle is a way to do that. Right. So I think it's the way that I got into motorcycles probably is the way that I look at them and try to photograph them. So it's, I suppose with car photography, it's much easier to have a standalone car kind of photographed. But even then, when I've got somebody's hand on the wheel, for example, or you can see their silhouette inside, it makes a lot more sense to me. Whereas I don't like pictures that don't make sense because I know it's fake. And I just think, even like for example, yeah, like I recently did this E-Type trip with my boyfriend, and he was like, "Oh, do you want me to get out of the car for the shot?" And, you know, it was sunset on top of the Dartmoor kind of landscape, and the headlights were on, and it was a beautiful shot. And I was like, no, don't get out of the car, because I just love that shot as it is with you. I can completely imagine me being the one that's sitting there. Or there's another couple of shots where he just stepped out of the car and went to go and walk back in, and I just, that whole having somebody in that image for me made that image much more alive. And it's the same with bikes, just having someone walking towards a bike, or, you know, riding it, because it's also such a community with your friends. Like, I love riding on my own, but I also love riding with my friends, and, you know, just it's just so much more personal, I think, than things like cars. Mm-hmm. So I think just being able to photograph people with these machines just gives light to everything that I love about the motorcycle world. You know what? I hadn't really even thought about it, but you are right. So next time I photograph a bike, I'm like, wait, do I need somebody in there? Do I want someone in there? I think so. But what's funny is that the times where I do photograph bikes without somebody on them, it's usually because it's my bike that I've gone to photograph it, because brands lent it me, and I thought I better take some pictures of this, and I've had to just like park it up somewhere and go and photograph it. But, you know, even from a design point of view, like, I can't, you know, designers don't design the bikes on the side stand; they design them upright. So as soon as you put it on a side stand, especially if certain bikes, like I think Harley Davidson's, have got quite low side stands, so you kind of put it over and you think, oh, I was panic. I'm like, is it going to fall? Is it going to fall? And then it like catches on the side stand. And I don't know, there's just something that I just prefer about the look of it being completely upright, something, you know, graphic about it. And I don't know. Does that make sense? I've said, does that make sense a number of times. It may mean that I talk a lot of rubbish.
It could be the interviewer. Don't, let's not leap to conclusions. I'm going to guess from your work that you've got some strong feelings about a patina. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yes, I love patina. I just think it's stories. You know, it's if you have two photographs, one of them is of a child's face and one of them is of some grizzly old man. Which photograph do you think is going to be more interesting to look at?
Right.
I think it's the same with cars or bikes, or, you know, anything that's got patina has got, again, we're rolling straight back around to the beginning of our conversation, stories, anything to do with stories. So, like, the brand new car, the modern car that hasn't done anything, you're like, yeah, okay, it's pretty, but it's, you know, there's nothing about it that is exciting. And suddenly when you've got something that's, I don't know, either worn down, or even it's had a little bit of a bash somewhere, and you think, I wonder what was the story there? How did that happen? The same, you know, with humans, with wrinkles, scars, or whatever. They're all part of these stories, and so for me, patina is definitely part of that aging process, and just the interesting side of things. I think it's the minute you start to put fake patina. So, for example, like it was on April Fool's a couple of weeks ago. Porsche asked me to kind of join in with them with their April Fools, and they wanted to pretend that you could now buy a brand new Porsche with this patina paint, and it's, you know, the new thing they were going to do. It basically looked like it was rusting, or like over parts of this car. It was horrendous. It was really bad. But I mean, I suppose that was the idea. And so I was like, yeah, sure, I'll be in on this. And, you know, I put onto my social media, I was like, hey, what do you think of Porsche's new patina paint? And like loads of people were just like, oh, why would they do that? And, you know, this patina is meant to be stories. It doesn't work when it's fake. I mean, I can completely agree with all of these people, but they're totally right. The minute you fake something, that I don't mind preservation. And for example, so say something was pretty patinaed, and then you've wanted to, say, restore a bit of it, and then you think, you know what, it was beautifully patinaed, and I've just had to weld up this patch. I kind of want to make that blend in with the rest of it. That I agree with. But when it comes down to having a shiny car that you think, you know what, I'm going to make this into some rat rod, I'm just like, why? Why would you do that? And yeah, it's I mean, some of the layers of paint that you sometimes see in cars that have been rubbed down and just been painted on top of each other, and you just think that was some very lazy painting in the past. But then you think about the stories and all of that. So no, I do love a bit of patina, but not too much. I don't want it to look like I've just pulled it out of a scrapyard or something.
Yeah. Well, I think the idea of implied story is. I think there's real truth in that. And I should say as an aside that the person who introduced us, Hugh Francis Anderson, he told me privately that one of the things he liked most about you was your lack of hipster pretension. And I think you've come through. So I accept your answer.
I will definitely take that.
Just sort of staying on the kind of some of the character stuff for a minute. In the latest episode of the Driven Chat podcast, which I'm a new fan, you talked a bit about motorcycles, which I thought was rebellious for a car podcast. I think you were interviewing the founder of the Distinguished Gentleman's Ride.
Yes, Mark Hauer. Yes, yeah. It's so funny actually because it is meant to be a car podcast, but we've probably talked about as many bike things as we have cars, if I'm honest. So but I mean it's because two of the three of our our hosts we're bikers, and so we're like, bikes.
I got that sense.
Sorry, I've taken you off your question.
No, that's okay. I was interested to hear you talking about the role of fear in riding, and I wish I'd written down the happy words that you said describe the feeling when the ride is over. But you acknowledged that out there an element of the experience is fear. And the reason that was interesting to me is that I find it absent in your motorcycle photography. There's no menace there. There's no implied violence. Through your eyes, the machines seem more friendly than fearsome. And I wonder if that's deliberate or on reflection what you think that means, or if maybe this is just a red herring. But I thought it was kind of, after you talked about the fear thing in that program, I thought, it's true. There's a lot of motorcycle photography being done by amateurs that attempts to make bikes look like weapons. So, just as a point of contrast, I wonder if you had any comments to share about that. Do you intend your bikes to seem approachable?
I think so, because so in the podcast, we basically talked about the way that when people say, "Oh, I couldn't ever ride a motorcycle because I'd end up killing myself," and it's if people who don't ride bikes say to you, "Oh, you ride bikes, aren't you scared of falling off, dying, etc.?" There is always an element of fear about it. And it's, my colleague John is the guy that said, that element of fear is the thing that keeps you alive, and it's the thing that makes you feel alive. It's the thing that at the end of a ride, you think, that was exhilarating because I loved it and I didn't die, and so which sounds almost quite morbid, but it's not in a morbid way. So I guess when I photograph bikes, for me, it's never about the going. It's never about going fast ever. It's always about the enjoyment that you have with your friends, with just the feeling of riding, and the elements that you feel, the things that you smell, the whole experience of getting from A to B. And that is, I think, what takes away any of the fear. And so, but also by having an element of fear in anything that you do, whether it is by having fear and then doing it anyway, is a form of courage and adventure. And I think I will always be a little bit scared of motorcycles because I really do know that they can be very dangerous. However careful I am on a motorcycle will not mean that somebody's going to come out at a junction in a car and, I might see them, but I might not be able to get out of the way or whatever. You don't really want to think about those things. But by anticipating it, I think you do appreciate everything else. And by this can be, I suppose, taken for things that are even not motorcycle related. If you're scared of something, then you do it anyway. Then that is such a form, of bravery and courage that at the end of it, you kind of think, I did that, and I feel great. And so, even if it is like, I don't know, just for example, after COVID, if it's the first time you've gone outside or gone to the shops and that scares you, then that is a complete bravery, and applaud yourself. And so it's, for me, the idea of riding motorcycles and that element of fear, it does remind me that even if I'm a bit scared, I can do it anyway. So I think also being it's a bit of I suppose an emotional side of things, being a one-woman female band in a very automotive bike world, I can sometimes feel quite out of place or a little bit scared, because I'm thinking like, oh, I'm going to totally get judged for this thing, these photographs, or what as if I don't know what I'm talking about. And already in this podcast, there's been a number of things I thought I definitely said that wrong. Why did I say that? That shouldn't have been said. But in my head, I'm like, it's, I just think to myself, it's, I'm still chatting, and you kind of just, once by getting through the fear and being able to do things anyway, it's just it gives you a sense of just confidence. That's what I'm looking for. Just an element of confidence, which it doesn't last forever, but that's where you do lots of these little things, like riding motorcycles, and it gives you a little boost of confidence. Or for example, funny one, I hate talking on the phone. Like I just cannot stand phone calls, which is funny. I've been on the phone now for an hour. And I suppose podcasts, I think, are different, but if somebody rings me and I'm not prepared for it, I'm like, no, I'm not going to answer it, because I don't like them. But when I do answer them and I know the phone call goes absolutely fine, I'm like, that was fine. I should do that more often. And that gave me confidence. I can answer the phone. It's such a daft thing. But I don't know, like, is that something that you ever feel yourself? Like, are you ever thinking, this thing scares me, but I'm going to go and do whatever it is anyway, and get on with it, or anything? Or are you just a complete fearless man? Are you a fearless man, Bruce?
God, I'm the very opposite of a fearless man. I should say, as an aside, you are the first other person in the world I've ever met who hates talking on the phone. The irony of this podcast format, continues to amaze me, because it's less like, to me, it's hell. I'll do anything to avoid a phone conversation. So you're not alone.
Which is funny, is we're both podcast hosts.
Right.
Talk to people.
Yes, I don't know. Something, people can figure that out. But in terms of the fear thing, I mean, I think, to the original question about how we look at the machines, I have this same, I interviewed a woman a couple of years ago who was kind of an adventurous sort of free spirit, and we got talking about our bikes as though they were kind of almost animals. And I sort of drew this picture in my mind of, opening my barn door and seeing all the bikes in there with each of them with their one big eye kind of wide open, saying, let's go somewhere. And it's funny that even though the first few years of my riding career were filled with fear, that was then and remains how I see the machines as kind of eager and positive and almost reassuring. I don't see them as dangerous. It seems like it's me that adds the danger, and so that's what was kind of behind the question. Is like, you take such evocative photographs, and yet none of the pictures of the motorcycles that I have seen you take portrayed the bikes as instruments of death. They look like fun things, and I just wondered if how deliberate that was. And I think what you're saying is that you're choosing to portray them for how you feel when you get off, as opposed to how you might sometimes feel getting on. Is that too much of a reduction?
No, I think that's completely right. That is, I could have just said that one simple sentence and that would have answered your question. But instead, I spoke for about 10 minutes about.
I had time to think.
But no, I think you're right. The points where I photograph like my own bike, and if I'm mid-ride, it's because I've kind of got into the swing of it myself, and I'm like, oh, I'm loving this. I absolutely, even though there is always a very low level element of fear, it's just still something that I think this is bringing me so much joy at the same time. I don't think I ever photograph anything that I don't know. I don't ever photograph any point of a motorcycle which I would do and would be scared doing. So that doesn't make any sense. Basically, I try to portray my own emotion of whatever the situation is going on. So for example, we spoke about the Great Mallee Rally. So Mallee also do their Mallee Mile, which is a motorbike weekend and of basically dirt racing. And it is so much fun. And I'm sure that if I was on any of those bikes, I would be bricking it because it'd just be, exhilarating. But you don't see any of that, and you just think this is just fun. This is all just absolute joy to watch. And one of the photographs I've got is of this guy, and I think it's his brother in a sidecar, and they're trying to race up this bit in between all these hay bales, and their smiles on their faces are just so jolly, and you can't help but think to yourself, oh, I feel jolly just watching you do that. So gone off on a tangent again.
No, in fact, once again, you've kind of anticipated the next question. So I have a real affection for that kind of photojournalism in the motorcycle world. I'm much happier seeing those scenes than I am, things that are more dramatic, for the sake of a word. And so I know, for example, the Distinguished Gentleman's Ride, which is in a few weeks, has a lot of meaning for you. It was your first assignment as a photographer for Petrolicious, I think.
That's the one, yep.
Covering it was what inspired you to become a rider, as you talked about earlier. And so I wonder, when you go to something like that, or like the Mallee Rally, what are you actually looking for? Is it those moments you just described? Or what's the, what is the hunt when you arrive and unsheath your camera?
Oh, I suppose there's never really a single moment, but whatever number of moments, little moments that portray just the feeling of being there. But it's not just about the wide open landscape shots with little motorcycles, because yes, of course it is that, but it's also the bit where for some parts of the Great Mallee Rally, for example, I'll ride pillion, and the point where my rider just rests his hand into the air in front of I just look down to the side of me and I can just see his hand just feeling the air, and I just think that's that moment that you think to yourself, that's what I feel right now, rather than this great expanse. Or when you're trying to dry your gloves on the engine of a BMW bike because it's sticking out and warm, and you can rest your gloves on either side to dry out from being rained on or something. That's another moment. It's not about the photograph of being riding in the rain or something. It's so I suppose I'm always on the lookout for those moments. And again, when it comes to that kind of the racing side of things, it's always fun to photograph the dirt being kicked up with the rear wheel of a bike, and it's that's always fun. But it's more the, I don't know, sometimes the prep beforehand, or people chatting and queuing up to go and do their run or something like that. It's more those images, I think, for me that create the feeling of being there than the big open shots of I don't know, things I expect to see. If that makes sense. Yep. It's I call them the filler moments, the in between touches, or. But when I used to shoot weddings, it was, it's never necessarily about the picture of the bride and groom, doing their vows at the front and the ring exchange, etc. Yeah, that was all part of it, but it was always about that, is you're just following them into their wedding like meal, and his hand might just be touching their back just gently, or it's those moments that create that feeling more than anything. So the filler moments, or lipstick on wine glasses and things like that. So I'm always looking for the in-between moments, I guess, more than the big hurrah moments.
Yeah, which I think in a funny way makes it easier for us to identify ourselves into what we're seeing. It makes me think about, we talked about Instagram a little bit. It makes me think about my endless fascination with the way people take pictures of their own bikes. And I'm wondering if you have any reflections, because presumably you follow people who do this and aren't professional photographers. I wonder if you think that social media in that sense has done anything for our appreciation of these machines as objects? By taking pictures of our bikes, do we somehow become more intimate with them? Do we appreciate them more? Is this a healthy thing?
Yes, absolutely. So I think when, especially when you photograph your own bike, it does make you appreciate every part of it. So when I photograph a new machine, whether it's a motorbike or a car, especially if it's something I've not shot before, suddenly I'm really looking for the way that it photographs and the way that the light is on it and the details that are on there. And you start to really absorb everything to do with it. And it's not until I photographed a vehicle that I really appreciate it or hate it, one or the other. But that's very rarely that I hate a vehicle after photographing it. You just end up appreciating it more. So I think by photographing your own bike and putting it on social media, you're like, hey, I really appreciate my own bike here, and I think you'd like it too. And then people, do see these photographs and think, I like that. I'm inspired by that. And so I will photograph my own bike and appreciate it. And so the circle continues. But what's funny is I don't actually think I photograph my own bike that much. It's I suppose it's the other thing. Like when I go out for a ride, I'm usually on a ride somewhere, and so I get from A to B, and I don't stop too many times in between. Or if I do, I'm usually either with my friends or something. And so again, it's for me, it's my bike is less of a design thing, more of the transportation and, as I said before, the adventure. But if I was to build a custom bike, which I think I'd like to at some point, I don't know how I'd go about doing it yet. It's just funny, actually. Literally last night, I was talking to my boyfriend called Will. I was saying, Will, you don't ride bikes, but do you ever think about doing a custom bike? Because he's a classic car restorer, so he knows fabrication, he knows everything to do with mechanics. He's like, you know what, I think that'd be really good fun. So from somebody that doesn't ride bikes and somebody that does, the kind of, I think something that could be created and then enjoyed from a visual point of view afterwards could be really interesting. So I think when people build their own bikes and customize them, that is where the love of the design and photographing and sharing it on social media can inspire so many other people to do the same. Have you ever built your own bike?
Not really. No, I had a project bike this winter that was more of a customizing exercise, but not an aesthetic triumph, more of a functional one. But I think that's something I'd like to do. But I would have a lot to learn.
This is the other thing. I think, it's when it's sometimes about that again. Once again, the element of fear of thinking, if I chop this end of my bike, am I going to totally screw it up, or is it going to go as planned? And learning how to do some of these things, and but just making it your own. I think that's the other thing about motorcycles, is that it's so easy to make it your own, from little tiny customizations to it, and that is what brings your personality out in them, and that you want to kind of share and show to the world. Just like anything really, your home design, your style, your motorcycle design, the way that you've changed it to represent you is definitely a massive part of, I suppose, the social media world.
Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, it just, to me, it just kind of reveals the depth of passion people have for these things, because we don't tend to take pictures of our lawnmowers, or at least not in great numbers.
You've just not found it yet, Bruce, on Instagram.
I've just not found it.
Hashtag lawnmower love.
I'm sure it's there. I wonder, I've had I've run into a couple of pieces of content that have attempted to kind of deconstruct how you find the beauty in a motorcycle. And so one example is, in the sort of chopper cruiser world, there's a lot of reverence for the line that's formed if you were to connect the headstock to the rear axle. That there's a purity to that turns those guys on and becomes the backbone of lots of customizing work. And there was a video on YouTube by a Canadian motorcycle retailer or motorcycle equipment retailer called Fort 9, which has become a bit of a global phenomena, and he produced this deconstruction of what makes a motorcycle beautiful using an Indian FTR 1200, which I thought was an interesting choice. And so, there's a couple of examples of people trying to explain how to find the great design in a motorcycle. And I wonder if A, that's possible, and B, what your answer to that question would be. How, if I'm standing there looking at a bike, do I deconstruct it in order to find the thing about it that is going to make that photograph great?
Oof, man, that's tough. I think it varies from bike to bike. And so, for example, like I'm not a big lover of choppers myself, and I've actually not photographed one. So maybe I need to do an exercise of photographing a bike that I don't like the look of to start appreciating its beauty for what it is and what the owner sees in it. Because maybe, again, for me, maybe it's ought to be about the lines and the details. And yeah, I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. I think it would have to be something I'd have to try and photograph. Yeah, try and photograph one and just to experience it. I'm not too sure. Sorry.
No. Well, I think that, possibly that's the right answer. Possibly you just can't deconstruct a motorcycle in that way. So, maybe that was just a trick question. But, we talked earlier about the aesthetics of newer bikes and of newer cars and where might that all, be heading. And it did make me think, well, you actually mentioned electric bikes. To me, a lot of what makes a motorcycle fascinating to look at, if not necessarily beautiful, is the kind of steampunkiness of it. You see all this plumbing and all this mechanical stuff and things that whir and bang and spin, and it's kind of awesome. And somehow it makes it seem like a living thing that you have to care for. And I feel like there's some primitive, signals being sent that create attachment. Electric bikes eliminate all that. How they look is far less determined by the practical demands of an air-breathing engine. And I wonder, as we sort of look forward, whether we might be losing something or whether there's a chance here for a clean sheet of paper and we're going to, redefine the idiom. I feel like earlier on you kind of hinted that you had some worries about this. Is that true? And what do you think about it?
I'm intrigued to know what's going to happen to the design of motorcycles, because yes, I do agree with you that it is, for me, the same. The thing I love about it is that the vision of seeing something that that creates explosions inside of it to propel you forwards. Like, that is amazing. And so to have that gone, or to be covered, well, it's not going to be covered, it is going to be gone. To have a battery covered with a fairing as such, I think it does open up the option of very simplistic, beautiful design for sure. Which you can't always get with, having such a lot going on a motorcycle. I understand that that's actually quite difficult to almost make it more simple, more simplistic. But maybe we're contradicting ourselves, because if you think about the idea of having to have something is, if a designer was to draw something so simple, then it didn't need to have an engine, for example, and it was a battery, then that might open up the ability to have something very slick and stunning. But will it lose a sense of personality, and will it just become like a fish on wheels?
Right.
Something like that. Just something that's, very, again, we're back to the aerodynamic side of things. Or will it be able to be something that ends up becoming almost imagine if it molded around your rider a little bit more, and it became something that you literally physically connected with, and it just became a part of, more so a part of you, rather than this something that you propelled. I think that makes sense. So yeah, I agree with you. For me, I love the engine. I love when I get to kickstart a bike. There's something that you're like, yes, I created life in this thing, which obviously I didn't. But the idea of actually kicking a bike over and feeling that engine, and it just there's something I personally really love about it, and I feel it's a connection side of things. the minute I would get onto something and turn the key, press start, and there's no noise, there's no, I can't even think of the word, but there's nothing coming back at you. It just becomes almost like quite a one-way thing. I don't know. It's the minute you have an engine kick into life, suddenly you've got life from your machine saying, "Oh, hey, I'm ready. Are you ready?" You're like, "Yeah." And so, whereas if you've not got that, I guess you're just like, it's just a bit silent, a bit sad. Which I really hope that at least until I die, hopefully, I'd like to be one of the oldest people riding a motorcycle in England, I think, at some point in my life. I have said that I would like to ride a motorcycle into my 90s. First of all, I've got to reach there. And the idea of riding an electric bike, I just think would be a little bit sad. So I hope that they do continue to make combustion engine motorcycles until, forever and ever. But I may not have a choice. Yes, so I'm not entirely sure. What about you? What do you think about the idea of electric bringing a change in design of motorcycles?
Yeah. Well, I have those same trepidations, and I don't want to be, that old man shouting at clouds kind of, guy who's, determined that the past was better than the future. And, and I'm sort of a relatively new rider. So 8 years. So I still have those same attachments to all those rituals and all those, kind of the bits of sensory feedback. And I find that very experienced riders tend to be super enthusiastic about electric bikes because there's a kind of performance purity to them. It's I mentioned talking with Eric Buell earlier, and he argued that part of the magic is going to be in suspension. It's going to be in the way the bike can handle, and that there's still the possibility of giving a bike character that way. And I really want to believe that's true. And I see the practical advantages of it. But if I'm honest, as you have been with me, I would miss it. I would miss those whirring, banging, clattering things a lot. Yeah.
I think also with the sorry, just to quickly finalize, with the whole idea of like range anxiety as well. I remember when I was driving an electric car around for a while, just that it was quite sad that I wasn't doing my journey to enjoy the journey. I was going from point A, which was my one point of charge, to point B, which was another point of charge, and that determined where I went. And I didn't like that. And so maybe at the moment, the idea of riding an electric bike, I don't particularly like the idea, because I'm like, I will just have to ride from point to point because that's where my charge is. Whereas maybe in the future, or at the minute, with petrol engines, you can just ride because you want to. You can carry some extra fuel with you, and you can just carry on. And that to me is such a beautiful freedom, which I don't know how long it's going to take for us to manage to get that same feeling of freedom with electric bikes.
Yep. No, I think that you've put your finger right on it, that there's the potential of a tank of gas, feeds the sense of adventure. And the idea of riding without a plan. I must say that one of my favorite things about my ugly motorcycle is it's got a 500-kilometer range. So it kind of doesn't.
That definitely works.
Matter.
Yeah, but I think mine's. I've never tested. I know. You know what? I have ran out of fuel once, and I think I got to about 130 miles. But it's only because I thought I had reserve and I didn't. So never mind.
From the unoriginal questions department, I have to ask: do you have some favorite motorcycle bikes you've either shot or would love to shoot? Is there a white whale out there somewhere? Not in the terms of a specific motorcycle. I don't think. I suppose there's definitely more motorcycle events that I'd love to cover, and that feeling around that event. So any major rallies or something like, the obvious desert rallies or something, or I would love to shoot more, again, for the type of bikes that I get there and the people that you find there, more than the individual motorcycle alone. But it's the same with cars. If somebody said if there's a certain any car, any location, what would it be and where? I can't answer that question either, because it's the exact same. It's more out of what's going on around it, I think, more than anything. Context.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I don't think there's a specific motorcycle that I'm like, I would love to shoot that one day somewhere. It's again more out of more out of what it's going on and what's happening around it than anything.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense, and maybe it kind of helps me with this is sort of one of my kind of wrap up questions here. I think so. Thinking back to Instagram for a minute, I have to think that just about anybody who rides and has a camera of some kind has tried, maybe many times, to capture how their bikes make them feel in a photograph. So you have those moments where you go out and you have an amazing ride, and you get off the bike and you say, I feel like a deity, a Norse titan of some kind. And I'm just going to take a picture of my motorcycle so I can remember this moment. And then 3 days later, you look at your phone and there's that picture and it's just a motorcycle in a field. And so you failed somehow. So I'm wondering if you have, so this is putting you terribly on the spot. Let's say I've just had the most transcendental ride on my hideous motorcycle, and I'm going to get off and I want to record this moment. What advice would you have for me about capturing that feeling?
I've only managed to, this is being completely honest, but when I'm on a ride on my own, that I've only managed to capture that feeling a couple of times myself. And the ways that I've managed to do it are by making sure I appreciate the way my bike looks at the time as well. So, and just, I think it's just making sure that that moment is the most romantic version of that moment you can get. So by photographing my bike purely as a complete side-on shot, profile shot with whatever has made me think this is amazing. So say it's a stunning backdrop or something, just making sure that I can try and line that bike up with that backdrop is something that I think, that makes me think of that moment. But again, otherwise, it's back to the fact that I haven't got a person on the bike. So me on that suddenly takes me out of that moment. So, for example, I went last summer in between lockdowns of COVID. I managed to go away with my dad for a road trip for a weekend, and it was awesome. Except my favorite photographs are the ones where I've managed to balance my camera on like a bit of rock or like a wet bit of grass because we're in Yorkshire, and photograph the two of us. And we're not particularly looking cool or anything. We are head to toe in waterproofs and it's, a bit wet and windy and we're standing by our bikes. But that to me, if you're looking for an emotional side of things, that's the point where I'm like, yes, I remember that moment. And I suppose just having your empty bike is the bit that I think makes it a bit sad. So if you can get yourself a selfie in there, I think that's the way to do it. Bring like a little tiny tripod with you, a little fold-up tripod. Get a photograph of you with that bike. That will help you remember that moment, I think. Mm. And also by this is a kind of a simple angle point of view. If you photograph at more or less headlight height, where you almost are looking up to your motorcycle, so crouched down, so you're at head height with your bike's solitary eye, then that brings a lot more personality into your bike as well. And I think they're the ways that I would try and bring those moments into your photographs, because I've had the exact same problems. I look back at my photographs that I've gone for rides with my friends, and I'm like, oh, that was actually quite difficult to try and get that feeling across. And the minute you've got somebody on it, or just the stunning background and a beautiful profile shot, because I imagine that's if you're going to design a bike, in my head I would design it profile shot first. I'm not a designer, maybe that's not how they do it. But it's kind of how I imagine. And I suppose they're the ways I would shoot it to try and take you back to that moment. Because I mean the best moment for me is when I'm riding along and I look in my rear view mirror and I see my dad riding behind me, and I'm like, and we're coming up a hill, so we've got this beautiful view behind us. And that's the point I'm like, I wish I could take a photograph of this moment. And I just think I'm just going to hold on to this into my mind memory photographic. I haven't got a photographic memory at all, but I'm going to try and hold on to this moment. If I could capture the minute that the future brings out like a pair of glasses that has a little camera on it and that I can wear all the time, and I don't look like some weirdo from the future, and photograph things that I see, it's gonna change motorcycle photography for sure. At least for me.
Yeah. Well, from your lips to God's ears, I would definitely be interested in seeing what you see. But for all that, I think that's actually great advice. I love this idea of putting yourself in, because I think lots of us just don't. And maybe that's, I mean, I feel like the backbone of this conversation has been a lot of the beauty of a motorcycle comes from its context. And that feels like the truth.
Yes.
That's awesome. So I guess, and I love stumbling on a truth. I mean, that sort of makes the whole podcasting thing worthwhile. So things I guess, are opening up a bit where you are. Do you have any grand motorcycle plans for the summer ahead? Any either professional assignments or big rides?
So I think I mentioned earlier, next week I take delivery of my Royal Enfield I'm borrowing for the summer. And I'm really looking forward to that. So I think I'm going. What's funny is that I'm actually on a shoot on when the bike's going to get delivered. So I've asked, literally before I came on this podcast, I asked Royal Enfield, I was like, so I'm on a shoot at this location. Do you reckon they could drop it off there? So I might just have it, like, make my own way, public transport, get a lift to my shoot and then ride back. So that will be a wonderful ride, I think, because it's just started to warm up a bit more in the UK this week. And it's the first ride after the winter season in the UK is always the best. But in terms of kind of bigger trips, I am doing the Great Mallee Rally, so I will be doing that. I don't know on what bike yet. Maybe a Royal Enfield, maybe my own bike. I'm not too sure. We'll see. And then what else? I probably will take my dad for another road trip if COVID allows, which I think it will now, actually. He's had his jab, so one of them. And it just basically, I think there's this time where my dad is at an age where he's young enough to do fun things, and I'm now old enough and have got into the things that he likes to do them, do all these adventures and things with him. And I know that this crossover time will actually be quite short. So, because how old is he now? 64. He will be 64 in the summer. And so I just think to myself, I might have 10 years of this. And in that 10, a lot happens in 10 years. So I just really want to try and create as many of those moments and memories as possible. So all of these like kind of adventures that he would talk to me about when I was a kid, on these motorbike rallies, I'd love to be able to do with him. So maybe not some of the scary ones, but I like the idea of a bit of adventure. So I'll probably end up taking him on like a ride. And recently, actually, I did my very first off-road motorcycling. Basically, I've never ridden off-road before. And a friend of mine, Sarah, basically said, "Hey, do you want to come and ride off-road, like learn how to ride off-road with me?" She's a journalist, she's got her own magazine. She said, for the magazine. So it was a job, but it was basically a good fun day out as well. So and trying to do that, taking me out of my comfort zone, a completely different way to usual, that was awesome. So just trying to learn how to ride a motorcycle off-road. And also I did fall a couple of times. So it was quite nice to be like, oh, I'm not that scared of falling off a bike when I'm doing off-road, because I'll try not to. It's not fun, but I'm not scared of it as such anymore. So I think I might try and take my dad on something like that as well. Like, Dad, come on, we're going to go for a ride, and then we're going to do a day of off-road motorcycling, and then we'll go and ride back home or something like that. What else? I you know what? Sometimes I'll just feel like it'll be a weekend, and I think, what should I do this weekend? I'm just going to go and ride a bike. I've got a tent. I'd love to be able to strap a tent to my bike and just go off camping on my own for a bit, but I'm not sure my boyfriend would like it if I went on holiday on my own. So with the Great Mallee Rally, I can get away with it because I can say it's work, kind of, because it is. I will bring my camera, and all the pictures I'll give to the guys that run the rally. So it is work. But the minute you're like, oh, can I go on holiday on my own? Do you mind? You're not really allowed to do it, are you? So, but either that or I get him into riding, which would scare me because I've seen how he drives E-types. So I don't know if I think I won't stop him, but I won't encourage him.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Yes. But no, so who knows? I'm just gonna, I suppose I'll see what comes up. The amount of times that friends of mine are like I've got a friend of mine called Anya, and she's a bit older than me. She's got kids, and her kids are now just old enough for her to kind of get back into riding motorcycles, which I think is, as being a mom as well, you're almost expected not to do like kind of dangerous things like ride motorcycles. And it's quite a sad thing because, like, you know, blokes can still carry on doing it, but oh no, if you're a woman riding motorcycles and you've got kids, oh, should you be doing that? And it's kind of a bit of a judgmental thing. So she's just got back into riding bikes, and it was funny, over the first lockdown last year, she wanted to get back into riding because she hadn't ridden for about 10 years. I had just had my engine rebuilt in the Honda, and so I could only go up to 4,000 RPM, which in top gear was 42 miles an hour, and it was not very fast. So, and I had to do 300 miles at 42 miles an hour. It took me so long, but it was great because she said, look, I'll come with you. I just want to go a little bit slow, you know, not have to worry too much. So we took all these tiny, tiny little twiddly country roads just to get my 300 miles up. And so, I think I'll probably end up doing some adventures with her as well. I love the idea of going off to, like, riding up to the Lake District and going for some like swims in the lakes and then camping for a night and riding back again. Just anything to do like that, really. I love the idea of it. So who knows?
Brilliant. That sounds like a great plan. And I think it probably is a lot of people's plans, you know, as the sun starts to...
Especially as, I don't know about you over in Canada, but like we can't fly anywhere and at the minute, and I doubt we'll be able to for another year, if I'm honest. So it's going to be, tough. So we're going to do a lot of UK kind of traveling, I think.
Yeah.
But I would love to ride in Canada one day. I imagine it's some of the most beautiful roads and landscapes in the world. Surely you're very lucky.
Yeah, but you have to bear in mind it's a very big place.
It is massive. It is massive. Yeah, but you can still say it's Canada. Like, it's, Canada.
Yeah, we're lucky where we live because we do have some roads that, you know, that aren't arrow straight, but you know, a great deal of the country was laid out in grids, and you have to be determined about finding the beautiful, you know, vistas sometimes, depending on where you live. But yeah, that's kind of how I feel too. Is I'm going to try to get something out of what I've learned in all this COVID business. You know, Amy, this has just been a ton of fun. I'm so glad you could speak with me. I'm so grateful to Hugh for introducing us, and thank you for showing the world that motorcycles are beautiful. I think that's noble work.
No, thank you so much for having me on. And I think it's really you that's showing the world that motorcycle is beautiful with this podcast. So no, thank you so much. And yeah, hopefully we can inspire people who are a bit, I don't know, worried about getting on a bike or learning or thinking, oh, I fancy doing an adventure, just to go and actually do it.
Right. Boy, if there's anything I have heard a lot, and thank you for your kind words about the podcast, by the way, but if there's anything I have heard more than just go do it on this podcast, I can't think of what it is. That always seems to be the period at the end of the sentence. So here's to that. So be safe out there and enjoy your newfound freedom. And thanks again.
No, thank you so much.
Bye now.
Bye.
This conversation surfaced a memory of a particular motorcycle I saw a few years back at an outdoor custom bike show. It was an old Harley Tourer, covered in grime and stickers with a bedroll bungeed to the top case, and it was attracting a lot of attention for a bike that wasn't even in the show. Nobody could walk past this machine without stopping and looking at it, and then wistfully through it and off into the distance. I took a picture and posted it to Instagram, of course, and in a vain attempt at profundity captioned it, "A motorcycle gets its soul from the road." Well, my lousy poetry aside, I think maybe that's part of what drives Amy Shore, and maybe the most important thing she left me with when our conversation was over. It turns out that beauty in a motorcycle mostly comes from the stories you write with it. A bike is more the canvas than the art, or something like that, And the feeling you get when your bike won't let you walk away without taking a picture, well, that didn't come from the factory. You created that together. As Amy so perfectly put it, motorcycles are incomplete without people on them. Well, I wish you a season filled with those moments. Keep that sense of adventure in your motorcycle life no matter what. Keep writing those stories, and keep sharing those pictures. Thanks for listening. You'll find show notes for this episode at thismotorcyclelife.com, including links to Amy's wonderful work. That's also how you can reach me if you have questions, comments, or suggestions. Emailing me at thismotorcyclelife@gmail.com works too. I'd love to hear your stories, and I'd love to write you back. And you can still find me lurking on Instagram, where I'm at thismotolife, and where you'll find many of the people I've interviewed for this podcast, including Amy Shore. For this episode's playlist recommendation, we're going to reacquaint ourselves with one of the most famous motorcycle songs ever recorded, Richard Thompson's ballad, 1952 Vincent Black Lightning. This classic is covered often, but never with the style and virtuosity of this performance by New York-based folk trio Red Molly, who actually named themselves for the song's principal character. I have to say, reaching out to Red Molly was the highlight of my week. They were really quick and kind in responding to my request. It's rare that I hear back from the performers themselves, and it turns out they're big fans of Movember. And they told me that being featured on this podcast would help make them look cool, if you can imagine. Well, after hearing this amazing performance, I'm sure you'll agree it's very much the other way around. The song is a story about the dangerous beauty of a motorcycle. And if you want to hear how it ends, you'll have to buy it or stream it wherever you like to get your music. And in the meantime, keep staying alive out there.
A girl could feel special on any such like. Said James to Red Molly, my hat's off to you. It's a Vincent Black Lightning 1952. And I've seen you at the corners and cafes, it seems. Red hair and black leather, my favorite color scheme. And he pulled her on behind.